we're lacking new treatments, we're lacking money in research. Psychiatry is the unwanted child of medicine in terms of innovation. Like in the EU, there's in the past few years, it's only 1 or 2 new medicines in psychiatry that has been adopted by the European Medicine Agency and introduced, compared to 98 or 100 in oncology. I think in many countries we are aware that we need to enhance our mental health. That we have problems, mental health problems in our society that affects us all. But now we need to speak about concrete solutions, and it comes with psychedelic-assisted therapies, I believe.
This podcast discusses psychedelic-assisted therapy, which involves the use of substances that are illegal in many countries. We prioritize safety and do not encourage illegal drug use. Psychedelic therapy should only be conducted in controlled legal settings under professional supervision. Always consult a qualified healthcare provider before considering any form of treatment. Today we have a very interesting guest at the New Health Club show, Théo Giubilei from the European Psychedelic Initiative, Psychedelic Care. And I would like to start with talking about Europe and psychedelics, because the main information and the main news we get at the moment is how this is doing in America. It's going to go forward, but Europe is still kind of, I'm not going to say a secret, but it's kind of not very much communicated. So maybe you can give us the first insight into the situation in Europe and how psychedelics are moving forward here.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. The European Union mainly is lagging behind when we speak about when we speak about psychedelic-assisted therapies. And it followed the war on drugs, so-called war on drugs in the 60s. And actually, France was the first country to prohibit the use of psychotropic substances 2 years before the US. And then the overall countries followed, and the research stopped. Unless there was one country, Czech Republic, that continued research. But yeah, the stigma is huge. It's still in the EU. Politicians, citizens, institutions, it's not really in the debate right now compared to the US, Australia. But there's one little country in Europe that is moving forward. It's like more than the rest of countries. It's Switzerland. And personally, I come from Strasbourg, and 2 hours from there is Switzerland, where psychedelic-assisted therapies have been introduced since 2014, and where patients under certain conditions can have access to those therapies. So, but in many regards, Europe psychedelics is not at the agenda right now, and yeah, that's what we're trying to push. Favor.
So, but you described already like several countries. So, but still, there needs to be obviously like a combined forces, and weirdly. But maybe you talk about how you and why you also created the organization, and what was your personal reason maybe also for this.
Yeah. So yeah, as I said, personally, I come from Strasbourg, and like France is, as many countries in Europe, still not doing, enough in terms of psychedelic-assisted therapies. There's not a lot of research or funding. There's a lot of stigma around the substances, and I felt like when I had this idea of launching this initiative, that the EU didn't do enough, the countries didn't do enough, and that a combined force, like bringing resources together, bringing countries around the table, data around the table, that would make people and their countries move forward. And what we want to avoid is that as certain countries are moving forward in the EU, like Czech Republic, the Netherlands, and where we see more research, we see like politicians started to speak about publicly about the benefits of psychedelic for mental health, that we felt that we want to avoid having only certain citizens eventually having access to the therapies, and other countries and other citizens, like French citizens, Romanian citizens, still not having access to those. So we believe that the EU is very much the right way to combine forces and to move forward together, such as the US at the federal level, or Australia as a country, as a state. And so that's why we want to push the EU to take action. And there is this amazing tool, which is the European Citizen Initiative for that. It's basically a democratic tool for citizens to help shape EU policies. when they feel there is something, a policy that they think it's important that the EU take action on. So we believe, the EU should take action and should develop policies in favor of psychedelic-assisted therapies. So we launched this initiative. So we can compare a bit to the citizens' ballot in the US, where citizens kind of put in place a referendum, people sign, vote in favor, and then there is a political response. So how it takes place in the EU is that you have to be citizens from 7 different countries to register officially the initiative with the European Commission. And then you have 1 year to campaign to collect 1 million signatures from these citizens. And if you get those 1 million signatures, then the EU is legally bound by the European treaties to respond to citizen request and say what it might do on the action. So it's really a way for citizens to push legislative change. And for us, we believe it's very important that citizens, organizations, civil society come together from all over Europe, and not only the country where it's already moving forward, but to show that all citizens want to make a change, because there is this mental health crisis in the EU, and definitely the EU is lagging behind in terms of research and political implementation. So that's kind of why we decided to launch it, because we believe the EU is the right level of action, and rather than having individual countries doing their thing in their corner and then eventually having an unfair access of to psychedelic-assisted therapies.
But why are you personally kind of convinced that this needs to happen now in the EU?
So personally, I was studying political science in Strasbourg in political science school, and without a scientific background, without a psychiatrist background, I didn't know much about psychedelics, and I had a personal experience in my early 20s with psilocybin, and it was my first experience with psychedelics, and it was not like meant to be therapeutic for me, like have a therapeutic benefit for me. It was just to discover, explore new, have new experiences with my friends and with my brother. And this experience was actually so strong for me. It helped, like it benefited my mental health in a way I could have never imagined before. And then I started researching about it and reading papers, reading an article, reading one book from a French psychiatrist, so called the Psychedelic Revolution. And I just discovered this whole new world of how it can help people who was suffering from really hard conditions like depression, end of life anxiety, also suffering with addiction. And personally, I felt okay in the job when I moved to Brussels. I didn't really like what I was doing. I was working in the European Parliament, also working with some advocacy groups, and I couldn't find the sense in my job. And I felt, as a citizen, I want to help the psychedelic movement, the psychedelic renaissance, and bring the knowledge into practice. And I knew about this European Citizen Initiative tool through my studies, and I figured out, that's how I can help. Like as a citizen, that's how I can make my little, I can put the brick in the wall and make things move forward with my knowledge, with the EU politics, and bring people together to actually force the EU to take action. So yes, I started to kind of draft some ideas and contact association. It was the time where it was 2023. So it was the time when some lobbying groups were appearing in Brussels, such as the Psychedelic European Research Alliance, PAREA, or Psychedelics Europe. They were just being created. So there was like this kind of movement starting in Europe to lobby the institutions, but we were lacking a common civil society movement organization. That's when I started to contact people, and they started to join the initiative, drafted the request, because you have to kind of draft some precise request that you want to ask the European Union, the European Commission, based on the European Commission competence. So we drafted that, found the name, and then started involving more partners, organizations, starting drafting the strategy, and involving more people, getting funds, and working on communication and so on. And here we are. We started the campaign to collect signatures in January 2025. So we have until January 2026 to get the 1 million signatures.
Okay. And what are first of all, I would like to know, do people actually from European countries that you work in or you have representatives, do actually, let's say, normal people, not scientists or doctors, do they reach out to you and say, well, I have this thing, I want to get rid of it. Where can I go? What can I do? Is this happening?
Yeah, and it's actually like I was amazed since the beginning that in Europe there was lacking. People felt we were lacking kind of a some movement, and we had a lot of people reaching out. So mainly psychiatrists, psychologists, psychotherapists saying, okay, I want to use psychedelics in my daily work for my patients. I see them suffering every day. I want to help them. And they would say, okay, in my country, like Italy, it's never going to happen. I mean, it's not going to happen in the coming years. So we need to have another layer of action, like to bring it to another level, to kind of force my country to take action. So we had those these people, so from all over the EU, so countries that it's more advanced, but mainly countries where it's not. So France, Italy, or Croatia, Poland, where it's still very lagging behind compared to the Netherlands or Portugal. And also citizens without a scientific background like me, but who had strong experience with psychedelics or who want to help the people, the close ones who are suffering. And they're contacting us saying, like my brother has this and I want to help him. And I read this book and I'm very interested. Or I saw Michael Pollan, TV show on Netflix.
I saw your picture with him.
Yes, yeah. And he's supporting the initiative. So very glad of that. Recognize the importance, compared to the US. I mean, the advocacy in the US is, much more advanced. So yeah, we have people with all backgrounds that discovered kind of the benefits and wants their country to move forward and the EU to move forward. Because we see what's happening in the US, we see what's happening in Switzerland at the heart of Europe, in Australia, Canada and other countries, and still in ours, it's kind of absurd.
And I mean, the countries you just mentioned that are very against or like have a big problem. I once read an article where somebody claimed that this is mainly Catholic countries who are have a really big problem with accepting this as a modern healing modality. Do you feel that? Is that something where religious backgrounds are kind of make it harder to land
it's
it?
hard to say. Like if you take Spain, they're way like if it's very true Catholic country, but still they're very much more advanced than France. I think that there are cultural layers. Maybe religious is part of one, but I think in France, for example, we have a strong, culture against alternative solutions. So we have institutional. Policies that are against any kind of alternative treatments, and then the people are very much against, and it translates into politics. So the law is very, very tough, like in Italy as well. But it's true that, if you take more Protestant countries like the Netherlands, they don't have that much problem. Also Switzerland, they are very much more rational in their approach. I think Germany as well. We see now that it's kind of moving forward also with the government, with phase 3 clinical trials. In France, we're still in phase 1, phase 2. So it's kind of interesting to see all the difference. But I think there's many reasons behind. Cultural difference definitely.
So how do we have to imagine this? Like we talked about it quickly earlier. So let's say you go out there, like this, let's say tomorrow in Paris or something. So you have like a stand in the street and you talk to people and say like, well, we are this organization. We would like to bring psychedelic assisted therapy to the EU. So how do people normally react? Are you doing this too, also personally, I guess, right? So because you speak French, so let's say we imagine you being out there in Paris and trying to convince people. So how does this look like?
Yeah, it's part of campaigning, I guess. Main of our activities are online, of course. We are trying to work with content creators, influencers, artists who've been also through, have experienced the benefits and could be the voices representing our initiative to make people sign. Because of course they have a big audience, and that's also, it goes to raise awareness. It's through people that people are kind of fan of or following. But when going in the street, it's quite interesting because people have very different approach. Some are very curious. Usually that's what we get. People are curious. They're not completely against the idea, saying you speaking nonsense. It's just people never heard of it. And I think that's the main part of the stigma that is still around, is either people think it has problems, like it can burn your brain, or but I don't think that's the majority. I think the majority is like they just never heard about it, because since the 60s we just stopped everything. We stopped the research, and 70s we stopped the research and stopped just publicly debating and talking about it. So I think it's just people don't know. So, but they're quite generally interested, not until to sign. I mean, but of course they want to know more about it, and that's also the difficulty about the initiative for getting signatures, is that people are not going to sign directly. They need to know more, and it's kind of also the idea behind the initiative is not only getting signatures, but also just to have an excuse to speak to people and say, hey, science is saying that. I mean, and not only science. I mean, there's a lot of evidence around, and just take a look. You could change your mind.
And do you feel it's also like a generational break, that younger people drinking less and less alcohol, kind of, switching to other social activities? Do you feel that? Is there also a change happening with that?
I think that the main people we have in the initiative are either very young, so kind of students, or very old. So I guess after 68, it's kind of the hippies. But I mean, the problem with the generational approach is that what we see in the EU, and I think it's all over the world, is that the younger generation, yes, indeed, is drinking less and less alcohol, is eating, smoking less and less. But I mean, it's also the main people voting far right, for example. It's the generation that votes the most far right. So I think it has different sides. It's not. I don't think the younger generation is generally more progressive. I mean, maybe one part, but still there's this kind of polarization in society with the younger generation. It's very visible there. So yeah, I think overall our society, just take a personal take, but this polarization also, leads to people getting on one side more interested about alternative treatments, alternative way of lives, but the other side is getting very conservative and close to the ideas of the what we are bringing with the initiative. And I think it's also why we're doing that and asking the EU. And we saw that with other initiatives. For example, I'm just gonna like a few weeks ago, there was the ban conversion therapies in the European Union, which was another European citizen initiative to ban conversion therapy, because it's still allowed in some countries to kind of force therapy. It's to force LGBTQ people to change their sexual orientation, and it's a way for, like, the EU is a way to bring those progressive policies and to force the national member states, which are more conservative, to take action. And that's also what we want to do, because in some countries, as I said, like it's too conservative now to hope for a kind of a change. So we need to kind of bring it to the bigger level, so the European Commission can kind of force the member states to discuss this and then bring in in their own country.
So how would this look like? Let's say you achieve your goal. We're going to talk about how in a second. But let's say you achieve this. So let's say you have 1 million signatures. And how does this actually look like that the EU could tell, let's say, France, you have to look into this?
Yeah. So maybe I can explain a bit what the European Citizen Initiative is and how the European Union works in just a few words. So you got 27 member states in the EU that are, like, there is of course the national competence, but they also share competence through the European institutions. So European Commission, European Parliament, and European Council, where they discuss common policies such as trade or the common health issues. And so a European city, so that's kind of the EU. So the European Commission proposes policies, and then it's debated between the European Parliament and the European Council. So European Citizen Initiative kind of comes before. So it's to force the European Commission to make a proposal. So to propose a new legislation that will then be discussed, as the legislation process is in the EU. It will be discussed between the Parliament and the 27 member states. So the European Citizen Initiative is, so you get 1 million signatures, and then the Commission has the legal obligation to answer the request. So you formulate different requests. It has the obligation to answer, and then to propose or not propose the legislation accordingly. And then this legislation, it will be debated by the 27 member states. So that's how you kind of force the EU to make countries aware and discuss. So you kind of force them, and the European Parliament then also can take a decision, and it can lead to new European Union policies. And so what we draft in, so we have 3 requests. So if we get the 1 million, the European Commission would have to take into account our 3 requests, which are the first one is to have common standards on psychedelic care throughout the whole European Union. So, for example, on the training of therapists, for what condition we could use psychedelics. So, for example, what we could imagine is that the European Commission would recommend the countries to go through compassionate use first. So for people facing end-of-life anxiety, it's a legal possibility in the EU and in all EU countries to, for example, use psilocybin, but no country is doing it yet. But that's something the European Commission could recommend. So create those common standards, create those expert groups with national experts, patient representatives, psychiatrist representatives that put them around the table and then they advise for future policies at the EU level and the national levels then accordingly. So that's our first request. So we put resources in common because otherwise Romania maybe doesn't have the resources to do the clinical trials. So we share the data. It's way much easier and more efficient than in the end. Second request is to boost EU-funded research. We need more clinical trials for treating promising conditions like anorexia, for example, or cluster headaches. Where we don't have much current, treatments available or efficient treatments available. So last year there was this first project that was fully funded by the EU, so 6.5 million, which is quite, and it's around 7 countries. It's on the use of psilocybin for end-of-life anxiety in neurodegenerative disorders. So it's called the PsyPal project, which is the first project of its kind in the EU. But when you look yesterday, Texas allowed 50 million, publicly funded 50 million for ibogaine research, and you compare that, Texas is 33 million inhabitants, the EU is 450 million inhabitants. So you compared 6.5 millions to 50 millions. One state in the US, by quick maths, it's much more than what we're doing in the EU. So we need more research, we need more funds, and the EU has the research program possible for that. The third one, and it's kind of an interesting one because it could lead to potential international changes, it's that we ask, and it's kind of a technical one, but basically we ask the Commission to request the member states to take a common position regarding international control of psychotropic substances. So it has been done for cannabis in 2019. So the Commission issued recommendation for the 27 countries, 27 member states, to basically delete cannabis from the schedule of the 69.
It was Schedule 1, right?
For this one, it was Schedule 4. It was the 69 on narcotic drugs. But so that's something the EU could do. So the EU could basically ask the 27 member states to take a common position at the Commission on Narcotic Drugs. So that could lead to international change. And what we ask is to move the psychedelic substances in light of the scientific research and discoveries and results, to move them from a schedule to another. Schedule
and who
1
makes
to
that
4.
decision? Who makes the decision if it's moved?
So that would be, the Commission could recommend the member states, then the member states take a decision to say when there is the new Commission on Narcotic Drugs, so it's every year in Vienna, then the 27 member states would have the same position to ask for rescheduling. And then you go through the process of how it goes in the CND, in the Commission on Narcotic Drugs. So based on Article 1 and 2, the member signatories can ask for rescheduling. So they start the process of discussion and voting, and then it could get rescheduled. And if you have 27 member states who have the same position on psychedelic substances, that could lead to a rescheduling. And
they have to be the 27.
If the council adopts this position, so it's this common position, then it would be the 27. And otherwise, the Commission could bring them to court. That's what happened with cannabis, because Hungary, when the council took the common position in 2021, Hungary voted against at the international level. So the European Commission brought Hungary to court because they didn't follow the decision that the 27 member states took. So that could be a strong change for international rescheduling, which would then facilitate research and policy implementation.
So that's kind of a challenge to bring 27 different nationalities, cultures. So, I mean, as we know, the main thing about the EU is people say, well, it's such a complicated system. It's too bureaucratic and everything. But what, in your opinion, is the advantage of this system of the EU right now?
Well, the advantage is that we have some countries that are moving forwards, and we have Czech Republic, we have the Netherlands. They do the clinical trials. They're like, the politicians are quite progressive, and we might see in the really short future some like policy implementation of psychedelic assisted therapies. The Netherlands for MDMA, and in Czech Republic for psilocybin and MDMA. So those people, those countries, they have the knowledge and they are quite progressive, and they could be the voices within the EU. So they could speak to other countries. So you have the Council, the European Council, which is the gathering of the member states, so the chief member states, also the ministries, where those countries could bring their experts to explain to other countries how they do it and why it's important that they should follow as well. So it's kind of a platform, not only for imposing legislation, because in health, it's kind of complicated, it's kind of a national competence still, but it's a platform to exchange and bring together, create coalition of countries to then bring other countries inside these progressive policies.
And I mean, what we also see is that in America, a lot of the energy that goes into this, or like also the way of convincing the state is through veterans.
Mm-hmm.
And now, because of the Ukraine war, we have a similar, let's say, case where the Ukraine seems to be very open to eventually legalize therapy or make it possible. But there's also the case of veterans, and there's a strong connection if it comes to Ukraine and America, because MAPS is involved also, and Rick Doblin, in thinking about how to help the Ukraine with this. Do you have interactions, or do veteran groups also approach you with this? That you move forward with this?
Yeah, we discussed with the Ukrainian Psychedelic Research Associations, and indeed, I mean, Ukraine is concretely the first country that needs. Has the bigger needs in terms of treating PTSD, because they're going to face a huge problem with that in the coming years, and that's why MAPS and also the EU is in discussion with this association, and they are the Ukrainian government's actually allowed now for rescheduling, to start the process of rescheduling within the countries to allow and to facilitate research and then implementation. So some countries, I mean, it's not concerning only Ukraine, but some countries also in the EU are directly concerned with that. So it's the country that share borders with Ukraine. So that's why we see Czech Republic is really moving forward with that. And in June, they will have they have a huge conference with veterans, with representatives from Ukrainian governments, with members of the European Parliament, coming together in Prague to discuss how Czech Republic could lead the EU in implementation, and notably to treat PTSD, because they have a lot of veterans coming to Czech Republic, but also civilians. Same for Poland. So those countries will face the results and the consequences of this war, and they will have to help on treating those people. Of course, it's different for France, and and that's why for psychedelics they have or for Spain or the countries or Portugal, is that every country also has their own mental health problem to deal with, and for some countries it might be they'll be more easily convinced with kind of this narrative and this need for treating people with PTSD. But take other countries, for the huge use of antidepressants. I live in Belgium, and it's one of the leading countries in the use of antidepressants.
Really?
And it doesn't seem to get better. It's 1 people out of 10 that is on antidepressant in Belgium. And Portugal is actually the one who's in the worst in the EU. So you see with psychedelic assisted therapies, how you could help countries with many different problems. And but yeah, right now with the war, I think PTSD, it might help convince some governments to move forward, such as Ukraine is doing. And we will see also results from these progressive policies implemented in Ukraine. And we'll see also how we can integrate the data in other countries.
So, and do you feel that I mean, the awareness around mental health problems, or like this wave that is becoming stronger. Do you feel hasn't arrived really in Europe yet in a way that it has in America? And then how do you think it's a good strategy to combine the cultural difference, like overcome the cultural differences, to acknowledge that there needs to come like a next level of kind of healthcare in terms of mental health?
I think it has changed. I mean, since COVID, we see that in Europe we speak more and more about mental health problems. It has become one of the priority at the European Union agenda. They tried to make it the year for the European Union, the mental health year, a few years ago. And I mean, in France, we like to say that we always 10 years after like the US, 10 years lagging behind in terms of innovation, like compared to the US. And so it has come. Now it has come in some countries. I wouldn't say the 27 countries, because if you take the Yugoslavian, ex-Yugoslavian countries like Croatia or Slovenia, it's still the stigma around mental health and the how to speak publicly about mental health. I think it's way much stronger than another country where it's more, when people are more at ease at speaking of that, like Germany or the Netherlands. But still, I think now, as it has become a political priority in many countries, then it's the time to discuss concrete solutions, like how to tackle these mental health problems. And as a whole, we're lacking new treatments, we're lacking money in research. Psychiatry is the unwanted child of medicine in terms of innovation. Like in the EU, in the past few years, it's only 1 or 2 new medicine in psychiatry that has been adopted by the European Medicine Agency and introduced, compared to 98 or 100 in oncology. So you see, like it's still like now we are aware. I mean, I think in many countries we are aware that we need to enhance our mental health. That we have problems, mental health problems in our society that affects us all, like indirectly or directly. But now we need to speak about concrete solutions, and it comes with psychedelic assisted therapies. I believe, like we shouldn't, and that's quite. I'm a bit angry against some governments that we shouldn't.
Which ones?
I'm the same, but I think I mean, that they shouldn't ignore what science says and goes still with outdated laws. And in many countries, like in the initiative, we can see that the people, like the Italian people or the French people, they are coming together for this initiative because the government is really going on the other direction.
Yeah. I mean, let's come back to your questions around the strategy, how to bring. We have 6 months now to get all the signatures. So, I mean, what you can also see on a global level is that, let's say, signature or classic media are still kind of, I mean, there is reporting on this, but it's still kind of, but it's this, and then it could be also wrong, and it's still dangerous. And it feels like almost you want to say the bigger discourse and the bigger engagement is happening on social media on a parallel world of making decisions also for a lot of people, with podcasts, with creators. Let's call it's happening in a creator industry.
Mm-hmm.
So is this something you realize, that this is where more power comes from now than from, let's say, Le Figaro or I mean Frankfurter Allgemeine in our case? Like, do you feel a difference there?
In terms of strategy, in terms of getting signatures, it's true that mainstream media or traditional media, it's not the biggest help. It's the biggest help, like when we get more signatures, if we get more signatures than the million, then they will speak about it because there will be a European Union action. So for us, it's getting the signatures for having mainstream media to speak about those kind of therapies for a public that is not, aware or educated about this topic. But for the campaign itself, it's usually go through communities that is already aware of those, the benefits for mental health. So let's say it's easier to get signatures. Yeah. Of course, there's a lot of people interested, even psychonauts, like the underground communities in Europe. It's huge. So we need to get to them to go to bring their voice at the international level and to show that no, there is interest, and then so we can educate the kind of the rest of the population through more mainstream media. But our strategy now goes through content creators, influencers, artists, musicians that have been through. There have been some, for example, been through psychedelic-assisted therapies. We have some renowned singers, for example, in Belgium, that have been through, like Selassou. She has been through psychedelic-assisted therapy herself. And that's the kind of voices to convince people then to sign, but also to bring awareness.
So what about scientists? This is not really
scientists. It
people you're
brings the
going for?
caution and the legitimacy to the initiative, and we have quite a big support of a research organization and kind of eminent scientists. For example, David Erizzo is a supporter, or Robin Carrot-Harris, Rick Doblin, and also so it's more national renowned scientists. So in Italy, in Slovenia, or Croatia, for example. But they bring the legitimacy, and that's what we need when people see the psychedelic initiative. They feel like, oh, it's a bunch of hippies. They want to get psychedelic legalized, but it's actually not that at all. And we want to show that no, the civil society, the scientific society is also united behind this initiative to convince. I mean, it's to convince the institutions, because that's how you convince them, with scientific evidence.
So you also talk to people in the street that, stop and talk to you, like, okay, this is the science, this is science-based, science.
Yeah, we don't come with, we don't approach people saying, do you know what the European Citizen Initiative is? But do you know that what science says? And that's like, if you approach people, it's kind of this authority figure of saying, like, what science and scientists are saying about psychedelics. Then for people, it's much more convincing than just saying, yeah, I'm from communication, or I'm from political science and I believe it's important. But no, actually, like, scientific research around the world shows the potential. So people are easily more, and even politicians. What we see we did an event in the European Parliament on the 6th of February for the launch of the initiative. And what was really interesting is that we had some hosts, so member of the European Parliament, so politicians that were hosting the event. And one was from the Green Party, so from the left, but one was from the European People Party, which is the more conservative, the right-wing party, which in the parliament. And it was the MEP was very much supporting. And in the room, we had some right-wing Polish, right-wing Croatian people, and because science is uniting. I mean, it's not only a leftist or right-wing question. It's mental health concerns us all. And when we bring the numbers, the figures, then people are convinced, whatever their political side are.
So, I mean, it's what you just said is similar to the US, what's just happening. So let's say the bipartisan approach of things is working very well. Do you see that also in the EU, that this is helpful also to get more signatures?
The bipartisan.
Well, I mean, it means like it's not connected to what you just said, to a party, like to conservative party can be people from there can be really convinced that this is helping, for example, veterans. People from a more liberal democratic party could also say, well, this is what people really gets out of a mental health crisis. So the combination of them is very, it's something that is just happening for a lot of people. It's very irritating, but it is also very effective at the same time. So do you observe something like this in the EU, that people from two camps come together for this?
I mean, they come together for different reasons.
For this,
that's why you kind of have to adapt your narrative towards like the person the audience you are speaking with. But what we see also, usually it's more the question of psychedelic assisted therapy was more brought forward by left-wing parties. But we see even within those left-wing, they want kind of more unity, because we need. And when we look at the political spectrum of the European Union, it's leaning more towards right-wing right now. And the people from the left also wants to convince the people from the right, because they believe it's important. So what they bring forward is also research, innovation, not lagging behind other countries like the US, that we need to attract investors, and we need to do more research in the EU. We need to have more clinical trials, like publicly funded, but also privately funded. So that's the argument from let's say more conservative politicians. But also in terms of mental health, the economic cost of mental health is huge in the EU. And everybody will agree that's something we need to tackle. And if we show that psychedelic assisted therapies are safe, are not addictive, and are not are efficient to treat people, then whatever the party you are, then you would agree. And that's just the approach needs to be a bit different. And for example, for the Green Party was more about also respecting the right of indigenous communities and to bring that to the table when the right wing didn't, it wasn't such a priority there. But yeah, they wouldn't say it, but yeah, that's what you feel also discussing. But they, in the end, eventually they all agree that that's something we need to.
So what are the best arguments to convince the left-wing people, and what are the best arguments to convince conservatives?
I think for the conservative is the economic cost of
depression.
Yeah,
for example,
and of depression, of PTSD, and also the war, the veterans. That's very interesting for the right wing. Also, what happening in the US basically with ibogaine and MDMA. For the left wing, I would say it's more on the right to explore, the right to the war on drugs was a failure, a complete failure. And so we need more rational policies. We know that being, like a prohibition doesn't work, and that we need to find alternative treatments and just to rehabilitate the psychedelics within society for the left wing is just to go against the policies that were put in place by right wing. And it's more progressive, basically, like kind of bringing in new alternative treatments. But it's overall, everybody knows someone who is affected by and that works with everybody. You don't need you don't need to adapt your language. You just say, do you know someone who has PTSD? Do you know someone who has depression? Do you know someone who suffers from addiction? And all the time the response is yes. Everybody knows someone who is affected by mental health problems. And yeah, if you show that it's promising to help the loved ones, then everybody agrees. It's more on a human side than on the political. I think it transcends political ideas.
So, and you have now 7 months to do this.
Yeah.
What is your strategy now?
Well, now we have onboarded way more people since the beginning. So it's also a question of like structuring the initiative concretely. How do you structure an initiative across 27 member states? We are present in around 20 member states now, where we have activists, volunteers, some partner organizations. So timing to have the time to structure everybody, to onboard them properly, and then now the strategy really relies for the summer on festivals, for example, to show, because I think psychonauts also have the voice on the table, and that they should also. It's a lot of people that know the benefits of psychedelics for mental health, and it's the main use of psychedelics is underground and it's outside of clinical trials, and we have this kind of nature, this data, and so people know. And we also they should also sign an initiative for that to show that there is promising benefits, and that we should take action. So that's the festival season, and then we are trying to expand trying to find a broader audience through, as I said, influencers, artists, content creators, sharing testimonials also of patients, of therapists from the EU, because there are many. Even in the initiative, the volunteers, everybody has a personal story, and sometimes very, very strong. Psychedelic therapies saved their lives, and that's stories we want to share and bring forward, because you touch more the people. The people that don't know, if you share a story, they will be much more interested. And so the strategy is to have more presence on social media with content creators and more podcasts and YouTube videos, testimonials, and going in the streets. There is also what we're going to do for the 10th of October, which is the World Mental Health Day. We are kind of bringing everybody together from the different national teams and to produce a white paper that would be used by the Commission, would be used by the European Parliament, even if we don't get the 1 million signatures. But it's kind of a document giving like the pathway for implementation. And that's also the kind of what the initiative is represent, is that creating this platform of knowledge of people from different backgrounds, from different organizations, to bring together knowledge that can then be useful at the EU level. Because if we look at the US or other countries, it's very much structured. We had maps for 30 years now. In the EU, it's way much more fragmented. So creating those kind of platforms of exchanging and bringing knowledge, it will be very useful in the coming years anyway.
And how important is it to get big entrepreneurs on this case in Europe? I mean, let's this case not talk about America, but just there are also like 10, 20 billionaires, big entrepreneurial names in Europe. How important do you think it is to involve them in this, bringing this thing forward? I mean, not even from their investors' eventual side, but just like to come out and say, well, it helped me just identify at some point with the topic.
Like it would be more the other way around. Like, why do we need? I mean, it's more why do they need the initiative kind of, because then it could be very like beneficial for them. For example, if you take if we have the 1 million signatures, if the Commission creates an expert group to advise the Commission on future legislation, then some entrepreneurs and their companies could be part of this expert group. They could answer to public consultation from the Commission, actively take part on the discussion at the institutional level in the EU. So that's I mean, the tool of the European Citizen Initiative is very interesting to then participate in future action. It's kind of the first stone to then having like the legislative process going on in the EU and starting discussing legislation, concrete legislation and implementation. So I think that's very interesting for the industry in general as well, because then it might lead to concrete action that might be beneficial for the European market. Because for now, it's still very fragmented. It's still we don't very much understand what it will look like in 5 or 10 years. But by bringing, I mean, by making the European institutions making much more clear, produce recommendation, and then engage with the EMA, then
the European Medical
European
Association.
Medicine Agency,
Agency,
like the FDA, the equivalent of the FDA in Europe, then it will bring much more clarity. So what we're trying to do here is just basically laying the ground for future European action in the 10, 20, 50 years, because we are still at the very beginning, but we start now.
So what is it that you need now to get these million signatures?
We need much more visibility. I think it's complicated to discuss this topic still. We have reached with a lot of media, and we have a good coverage of national or European media. But still, psychedelic assisted therapies, it's not yet like a priority but also we see with the political situation right now and the geopolitical situation in Europe, and the priority is not on mental health, but it's more on war, it's more on economy, it's more on. So it's hard to convince media. So now we need more visibility on social media, with creators, with influencers, with artists, and I think we're growing very organically, and I think that's also the beauty of the initiative, is that the citizens are generally interested to give their time to participate and to convince people and to produce and bring their talents together, and also engaging with research association. And it's very, everything is very organic, and but also, financially, of course, this is an initiative like that requires a lot of resources if you want to bring visibility, because the European Citizen Initiative tool is not a very famous tool in the EU. But for example, that last a couple of weeks ago, I told you the ban conversion therapies that actually they collected 800,000 signatures in 5 days.
Wow!
Yeah, it was impressive.
Yeah.
And they were when I met the organizer, they were completely blocked, and kind of like they felt they would never meet the targets. They were blocked at 250,000 signatures, and it was 3 months before the end. So you feel like you cannot make it. But in the end, there has been a huge call from artists, politicians, creators all around the EU, mainly in France, and so they got the million in 5 days, basically.
So here's your chance to tell creators to join you, actors, whoever it is. Like, what would you like to tell them? Why should they join you? We
need everybody in this initiative. That every citizen counts, but also the people who have access to a broader audience. They need to be the voices, like to convince, let's say, the common citizens about the benefits about psychedelic-assisted therapies. And such campaigns, they are a huge help to bring the spotlight on this on the topics, on such topics. So really, we invite everybody who could support us in bringing more visibility about the initiative to help us convince European citizens. Because if we in the end convince European citizens, we convince European politicians to take action. Because for me, we believe that still it's the main obstacle to any implementation in the EU is the stigma. And it's still like the politicians won't take action. That's what we hear from some member of the European Parliament. They are personally very interested because they saw Michael Pollan, the TV show. One of them told us that. But the voters don't want. It's not like there is not enough visibility. And really, if we all come together from the 27 member states and to make people sign and to make people like vocal about it, then it can change people's mind and it can change politician minds. And then it can change mental health eventually, because we can have more progressive policies.
What is your superpower to destigmatize? What's the most effective thing to do it?
Mainstream media. It's mainstream media and public figures. That's if you have one public figure speaking about it. For example, Sting, the singer of Police, like he's been vocal about psychedelics.
LSD especially.
Yeah. And he said like psychedelics are not the solution to the problems of the world, but they are a great start. And I think it's very true. And if Sting, for example, shares the initiative, calls to sign the initiative, that would be wonderful. But it would also convince people, because people would get interested. And what we want is not, to say you have to believe psychedelics work and we're telling you like how it works, but get interested. Like it's what people think and what science says and what we can find. That's like there's a huge gap. So just like research, and if a public figure speaks, is vocal about it, then it can change people's mind and they can get interested in the topic.
Who would be your dream public figure?
Sting.
I mean,
Sting so, definitely.
Well, I mean, it could be, it's worth a try maybe, because he was in that movie, Have a Good Trip, and he was talking about it for quite to some extent. So
yeah, exactly. So that would be those kind of public figures then. And they really match well with those kind of campaigns. If you take in the US, also the citizens' ballots, there were some celebrities also supporting. But for My Voice, My Choice, which was another European citizen initiative in Europe that got the million a few months ago, it was mentioned at the Oscars, and it brought a lot of visibility. Pedro Pascal, for example, he was supporting the initiative, so it brought also a lot of signatures, and then people speak about it, and then it appears kind of everywhere. And then of course it's not only the visibility, but then concrete actions that can be taken by the EU. It's a great democratic tool, so let's use it.
So you need like a EU song contest, Eurovision song contest.
That would be awesome.
For psychedelics.
That would be awesome. Yeah, definitely.
But I mean, so let's move a little forward. So let's say the white paper is there. You have enough signatures. How would the next couple of years look also in terms of having each country ready with therapists and even hospitals, like private practices? How do you imagine this, and who would you collaborate with to move this forward?
So just after the initiative, you get the 1 million, then the commission has 6 months to respond, and then it might take up to 2 years before like a legislation. It's the EU. It's long. It's bureaucratic. But then bringing 27 different member states with 27 different national healthcare system, of course, it's kind of complicated. But then what would be the best is that the Commission recommends some use and then the national member states could adapt regarding to their legislation. Of course, there won't be one common use and one common way to go forward. Because also, if you take reimbursement schemes, I mean, it's very different regarding every EU country. And there's been a great paper recently by Blossom Analysis on the reimbursement possibilities in the future if psychedelic therapies are implemented. So it will look very different according to the countries. And so they could take different pathway. But I think that in 10 or 15 years, and it's very hard to say right now, but I feel that some countries will have moved way much more than other countries, and then it's like there will be different levels of implementation. I think the Netherlands and Czech Republic will be the ones moving with MDMA assisted therapies for treating PTSD, But what I see is that we have, different steps. So the first, I think, would be compassionate use, because it's the EU law to say that you can use some substance that is currently being investigated in a clinical trial, and you can use it for conditions where you don't have current treatments, or that are not sufficient, or people are in pain and they don't have access to any efficient treatment. So that's something that could be implemented in the 5 years. Then, of course, you would need to train the therapists. So the EU could also provide some recommendation and guidelines on how to train therapists. And then you have to, and then it takes 5-10 years more, and then you open it as for the people who resist to treatment, of treatment-resistant depression. That would be the first targets, the first audience, because we lack of therapists, trained therapists in the EU. But then, for me, what I would, like to see is that it could be proposed to as a first-hand option. So people who have depression, they could be offered antidepressants, but they could also be offered psychedelic-assisted therapies. That's not going to happen in the next 10 years or 15 years, because we don't have the therapist. It's not well integrated in the reimbursement schemes. We also, how are we going to reimburse psychologists, for example, if they are part of the therapy? So that's questions that still need to be answered. And that's where the Commission could provide recommendation and provide guidelines. And then member states could exchange best practices. So there's a long way to go still.
And what is the biggest legal kind of conflict to solve there? Because 27 different healthcare systems, but also 27 different kind of legal systems. So how do you work around this right now?
Well, that's the main one. Is the main obstacle in that is the adaptation of the international regulations, psychotropic, the 1971 psychotropic substances convention. And that has been translated in 27 member states' legal system. So that would be it is the one that is preventing research and you have to facilitate research. So by deleting that from the 27 different legal system, that would facilitate, and then of course it has to be adapted according to the legal system. And it's very complex, because I don't know anybody, or at least in the initiative or the EU, that knows how psychedelic-assisted therapies could be implemented in the 20 different healthcare system, because they're very different. And so that's why we need the Commission with their resources to be able to produce some impact studies, and so to provide this recommendation and these guidelines, and to bring experts from reimbursement, from healthcare authorities, and to discuss what's the pathway to be implemented. And
this is the real big challenge, right?
Yeah.
Behind everything.
But
I feel
where we come is that we don't say that we have the response to everything and it should be done that way. Really what we want to impulse is that it should be discussed at the EU level. Of course, there will be long discussion, and if the ECI succeeds, it doesn't mean that in 2 years we'll have psychedelic-assisted therapies, but it means that it lays the ground to more information to be collected, to create the debate and to create the conversation around with different experts and people who could have more precise answers to these questions. So forcing them to come around the table and to produce, this information that we're lacking now. Because that's also why we don't know what's going to happen in the EU, because we don't have the information. It's still too complex. And so by bringing these people together, then it will lay the ground to implementation and an efficient integration, accessible also.
And how do you think AI could help you with this?
Oh,
I think it could help you.
AI for us, with the initiative, it helps definitely understand the healthcare system and could then, provide information on how it could be implemented in a different way. But to be honest, I'm not an expert in AI. I'm very AI naive, let's say, and I'm very young and old at the same time. And have there are people in the initiative that are very much into AI, but I think in Europe it's also very slow compared to the US. The comprehension of the potential of AI, but it's also scary at the same time. But for example, it could help with therapy, and it could help with integration. I think there's many possibilities we don't see or we just start to see now, but that is to be discussed. For me personally, it's still I feel like I don't know anything. I don't understand. It's kind of this giant beast that could help us.
Oh, really?
Yeah, but it's maybe it's the French, reluctant way to innovation, and
Yeah, it could be.
But it's but at least definitely to help us also in the initiative in campaigning and in marketing. It has like it's an amazing tool for that, I must admit. And translating, because again, it's not 27 different languages, but it's 21 different languages. So speaking in English to an Italian, I mean, might not get an answer. And French, like if you do a campaign in English for French people, they will get reluctant, because it's still a lot of people don't understand well English or don't want to engage with English. So you need to adapt and slate the campaigner. Of course, you need the human resources, but AI is an amazing tool for that.
And I mean, I still want to come back a little bit to this question I find super interesting. How do you adapt really to the cultures of Europe? I mean, as opposed to America, it's like one big culture. I mean, you could say, okay, there's East Coast, West Coast, but still it's kind of a more of a tighter universe. Whereas Europe, I mean, which is great at one point, but at the same time, it makes, I mean, Swiss, like even DACH, like, Germany, Switzerland, Austria, it's one language, but it's like such a different culture.
So that's why we created national teams. We have people in the different countries. Right. So we have a European team that is coordinating and strategizing the campaign. But on the other side, we have national teams to adapt it to the national context, because they know, they know which musician, they know which message would work the best. For example, you bring MDMA in, like if you speak about ecstasy or MDMA in France or in Poland, it might be not the most efficient, but mushrooms people know. Mushroom they've heard, or LSD they've learned. Ireland also has a special culture and history with psychedelics, with a strong history of shamanism, but also in Poland. So you can also relate to that, to speak more to the national and local culture. But if you speak about shamanism in Portugal, it might mean less, or in Estonia maybe. I don't know, of course, all the specificities of the different countries. But so we have the people, the national teams in the countries to adapt. And to adapt the campaign into the national landscape, environment, political environment, context. Also, if there is some debates at the national level, if there's clinical trials, if there's specific research, also for different conditions. As I mentioned earlier, you wouldn't speak that much about depression in some like Sweden, or depression really hits everywhere actually, but
it's not a conversation, and like an open conversation, for example.
Yeah, exactly. And that's also, if you face the stigma about depression, that's what they face in Estonia, for example, or in Finland. Even talking about depression is complicated. So then talking about psychedelic-assisted therapies for depression might get even worse. But if it's for alcoholism, maybe in those countries, like, like in Finland, alcoholism is, it's in the public debate. They discuss it. They produce laws to forbid shops to sell alcohol after 6 p.m. They make the price very, very high. So it's a commonly known issue. And so you kind of adapt this to the national context.
So, I mean, it's interesting that also similar to sometimes the creator industry, it's sometimes a very local or national game that brings you forward, actually. Or podcasts, like Andrew Huberman in Germany is like, I don't know, like number 40 or 50 on the podcasts. And in America is like the go-to person now for medical questions, or like, that kind of new information. So do you feel this is more effective than to create, let's say, in that case, like national destigmatizing strategies than one European destigmatizing agenda?
I mean, it's impossible to create one European destigmatizing agenda. It's too dependent on the national context. If you take if we take another topic 1 second, if we speak about European army, like European defense, it will resonate very much different according to the country. So you cannot talk about European army in the same way in like every country. Poland will be very kind of reluctant. France will be in favor. Germany not so much. Spain, what are you talking about? And so I think it's the same for destigmatizing, because it's based on 27 different cultures and history. And so yes, I think adapting to the national context with the national means of debating. For example, in Italy, you mentioned the podcast in Germany. In Italy,
Yeah.
they really like to go outside and speak and have demonstration. That's maybe based on the agora and the just publicly speaking. I was in Italy not so long ago, and you just arrive and there are people in the streets with banners and speaking with a microphone. I don't see that in other countries. I mean, for example, Belgium, it's not kind of happening. There's huge demonstration, but it's more with unions and so on. But in Italy, they go outside and speak. And in the initiative, that's also what they're doing. They create a lot of small events and they go in the streets. And it's more the way they do to discuss and exchange ideas. It's more like on the Italian forum, like the Roman forum.
Right, of course, yeah. So how can we convince French people? Through fashion or?
Yeah. I think what's interesting, what we see and very interesting is in the people who signed the initiative is that the countries that are the most repressive laws. So Italy and France are leading the way in terms of signatures because people, like there's a huge part of the population that is against what's happening or imposed by the government, so by the government policies. So they're more leaning to sign because it's against the government. Like in Italy, with Giorgia Meloni, and there's this kind of counterculture that is getting organized, and so they are way more, interested to take part of this. It's a way of going against the governments and create that counterculture. So they kind of structure around the initiative as well. And in France, it's a way of saying no to the government. So
I mean, if you that's great. That's always a great motivation, right? To say no to government. And then I remember this recently. There was this one show on Apple about this French designer fashion house, La Maison, and it's thriving on conflict and misery. And it's like, will it ever be resolved? No, because this is what it's thriving on. So it's very interesting how the culture is maybe saying, I don't want to have a resolved mental health problem. I just want to thrive on it.
Yeah, I know exactly. And I think France is a perfect paradoxal country for that. Like we like to blame others and we like to complain, but we kind of, like we are complete in our complaining. Let's say we kind of thriving on our complaining, I feel. So it's very interesting. I mean, also through the initiative, we can also learn, and that's more personal notes. I'm learning about cultures a lot because,
yeah, of course.
I mean, maybe for the US, listeners, they're in the US, I feel like, okay, it's Europe. It's kind of, like it's okay, different cultures. You got Italian, French, but it's kind of the same.
Yeah,
but
because you go on vacation in France and Italy.
And here, I mean, for me, like understanding how it works in Croatia, it's very different. And I learn a lot because for them, they speak a lot about post-Yugoslavian wars PTSD. And in France, you would never imagine that. It's not like you don't speak about that. It's not debated. It's not taught in history classes. It's just the war you teach and NATO and the US and so on.
Right, you're disconnected from it.
And every country has their own cultural narrative and their roots, like regarding mental health problems. And France, I would say, what's debated is very much alcoholism and end-of-life anxiety. Italy and France, it's like, I mean, Switzerland, that they have very progressive policies on euthanasia and end-of-life anxiety. And in France, it's currently debated. And in Italy also, they're really pushing forwards. And that could be a way also to bring in psilocybin in the use of end-of-life anxiety and the right to try before you die.
So this is when people have compassion if you're basically dying.
Yeah. And no sane politician would go against that.
Yeah, interesting.
Yeah, I mean, and that I think in Europe, it's one of the narrative compared to the US with the veterans. That also the compassionate use when dying, it's one of the strongest because that's also something we're also facing at some point. Anxiety compared like the existential distress and about dying, and everybody knows that the grandparents who was about to die or an uncle or a cousin and that's something we are living with and in our society and especially the European society. I don't know much about the US for that, but we don't speak about death. It's not integrated in our lives. I mean, we avoid it at all costs. And I think psychedelics are an interesting tool there for reintegrating that in our changing the way we see death in our society.
I mean, it's also allowing somebody to die with less anxiety.
Yeah, exactly. And then it means less anxiety for the closed one as well.
Yes, of course.
Yeah, and that
like a closure maybe of something that has not happened before.
Yeah, if the person who's dying is happy and at least not anxious about dying, then it means also for the loved one it's less hard. And it could resolve a lot also of not little, because big problems, but individual problems and family and communities problems and suffering. That's there was this PhD, Tommaso Barba, who is in Tommaso, yeah,
he's coming on our show also.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
I'll say hi. And we went on the Italian TV and say something very true, like that this is absurd that we don't allow people to try those substances before they die. Why don't we yet? Like we maintain people artificially alive, and even if there's it's too much suffering, even we don't allow them to die, and we don't allow them to try these substances like the mushrooms to die peacefully, and that's absurd. I don't see a logic behind it, a reasoning behind it. That's what we're also trying to change.
So every European country, whoever feels called to this, should reach out to you with their own cultural public figure and support you, right?
Yeah, exactly.
We have 6-7 months to go.
Yeah, exactly.
And we really want to make this happen.
In 1 week it can happen, but yeah, better to be prepared, to start sooner.
And can we just finally say the date when the white paper will
so that will
launched?
be on the 10th of October. So we're preparing now, starting to work with the national teams and partners to produce the white paper, and also developing a lobbying strategy to be used by the member of the European Parliament who are supporting us, to bring it into the Commission. So even if we don't succeed, we could see something still happening on that side.
So lobbyists are also important for you.
Yeah, definitely.
Well, great. Thank you for being on the show. Very interesting, new perspective on things.
Well, thank you. Thank you so much.
And great to see you soon, hopefully, somewhere on one of these conferences.
Somewhere in the 27 member states.
Exactly, somewhere in the 27 states. Thank you for listening to this episode, and thank you for listening to the show. If you want to know more about how we fast-track psychedelic destigmatization, please head over to the New Health Club podcast on Apple or Spotify. There are many episodes talking about several substances, several treatments, several ways how psychedelics can be used these days. You also find us on Instagram under the New Health Club. But if you want to know more about our nonprofit foundation, the New Health Institute, please head over to www.thenewhealthinstitute.org. Of course, we are here on Instagram too, under the New Health Institute. Very important to me is also that you subscribe to our newsletter on Substack. Please look for the newhealthclub.substack.com. This is very important to me because we really start to build right now a media platform on Substack around psychedelics and new health topics. And of course, we would love your support on this, and love if you subscribe, love if you tell other people, your friends, your family, your community, so we can really kick off this endeavor and actually have another place, another platform next to the podcast where we can get you information and education around psychedelics.